You're listening to Beyond the Stage from the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. In each episode, we introduce you to the artists, scholars, students, and arts professionals interpreting our world through the arts. Join us this week and every week this summer as we explore their stories. Let's get started. Okay, good morning. Thank you for being with us, Kathryn. How are you today?
So far, so good. It's a beautiful day here, so can't really complain.
Good. And where is here? Are you here in California or?
No, I'm working remotely from Connecticut.
Oh, I bet it's so beautiful in Connecticut in the spring.
It is. Everything is starting to bloom, so it's definitely nice.
Oh. Well, that's nice. I'm glad you have a beautiful view and beautiful weather. So we'll go ahead and dive in. You are the production manager at the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, and you've been with the Carpenter Center for 20 years. Do I have that right?
25 in May.
25. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So you have seen a lot of shows come in your time there, and I'm excited to talk about those today. So to get us started, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you ended up at the Carpenter Center, all of that?
Sure. I grew up in Connecticut, which is why I'm here working remotely from home with my mom. And then I went to school at SUNY Purchase, which is not really far away. They had a design technology conservatory BFA program that I went to. And, from there, just had a lot of different jobs and ended up at the Carpenter Center 25 years ago.
Was the Carpenter Center what brought you to California, or was there a different job or role that brought you out here?
No, actually, it was the job. I had been working in Philadelphia at the opera company there and had a friend whose husband was the director of a summer arts program, which is part of Cal State system. And this job was opening up, and he suggested it for me through her. And so I applied, and after a very lengthy process, ended up at the Carpenter Center.
Awesome.
And it just opened up. It was open like a year and a half when I arrived.
Oh, wow. So like from the beginning. So a lot has changed, I'm sure, in the time you've been there. Maybe
Immensely,
we can
yes.
get into that in a bit. What got you interested in the performing arts in the first place? You said you studied design technology.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that interested you about that?
I was really fortunate living here in Connecticut. It's really close to New York City. And so we had a doctor that was in the city. So every time we'd go into the city of the doctor, we would see a show or a concert or a ballet or an art exhibit. So I was exposed to it really young from my parents and an aunt that I had who was a textile designer. And it was just an instant love. So I started doing theater as a young kid and then sort of segued more into sort of balance between that and technical theater about 13, and then just continued from there. It was sort of a singular focus.
Yeah. Was there a show you remember seeing as a kid that you just fell in love with?
Every show has a special meaning because it has a memory to it, not so much necessarily the show. I think my very first Broadway show was Annie with Andrea McArdle back in the day. So there was, there's an excitement about that. The Nutcracker was always magical to see. We did a lot of classical music concerts, so art exhibits. I remember seeing Monet and Picasso at the Metropolitan. So just a lot of really great foundation as a young kid.
Wonderful. I mean, I think it goes to show too, like how immersion in the arts from a young age is really important and can develop that love and make people passionate about the arts for life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I spent some time in New Jersey as a kid, and the very first Broadway show I ever saw was Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember all my parents could afford was like the very last row on the very end, right by the fire exit. But when they did that transformation from the beast back into the human at the end, I think my 6-year-old self was just like, this is magic. There's no way to explain it. It's literally magic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you remember that your entire life,
Exactly.
It sticks with you.
So you went to SUNY Purchase for undergraduate school, which for people who are listening that don't know, Purchase has an incredible conservatory for theater and design and performance. Alumni include Stanley Tucci and Wesley Snipes. I have a couple friends from back in Nebraska that went to Purchase. What is your favorite memory from being there in that program? It's very renowned. So do you have a favorite show you worked on or a favorite memory from that time?
I can't say that I have a favorite show, but what I would say is what I loved most about Purchase and the reason that I wanted to go there was the intensive training that you get. If you're looking for a liberal arts education, it's not the place to go. They don't have sports teams, so you're not going to have that sort of college experience. It's really a program for people who know what they want to do, and you are just immersed in it. And one of the biggest benefits is that as students, you do everything. So you get hands-on training as you're the set designer, you're the costume designer, the lighting designer, the stage manager. You act as those roles working with professional directors, as opposed to other programs where faculty sometimes are the designers and you're assisting. So you're really getting hands-on training from day one as to how to interact in a professional setting. So when you leave, you have that experience and that training to build on. And that's what really excited me about it, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I didn't want to have to deal with taking chemistry or any of those sort of general ed classes that I didn't need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you, like you said, you kind of got to play a role in different elements from like lighting and sound design to costuming. Do you think knowing all those elements plays a role in being a strong production manager, knowing how each of the components work? Because in my mind, that's kind of what a production manager does. Is they have to know every element so they can know how to manage it and oversee it and make sure things get done properly. How do you think that plays a role?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I was going to actually leave the program after 3 years because I had finished all of my credits. So I was going to graduate early. And they gave me an opportunity to spend my senior year as a stage manager at the Metropolitan Opera. So I spent my entire senior year working as a stage manager of the opera, which was amazing. It's such a benefit in so many ways. But the biggest benefit is sort of, as you said, at the end of the season, I had an opportunity to stay on. They had an opening, and it just clicked for me, as much as I loved stage management, that there was something else I needed. I wanted to have a bigger voice at the table and have a bigger part in creating whatever the end product was. And a stage manager just didn't have a big enough voice. So I decided to leave there, and I went on tour as a production and tour manager. And so that's sort of trial by fire. You have to see the big picture. You have to know all the components. You have to make decisions. And so that was really the turning point for me. And afforded those, I was on tour for about 4 years, and you gain a lot more experience as to all the other aspects. And from there, I went on to the opera company, and once again, building on more of those needed foundations of different areas, working with artists and contracts and visas and transportation and different unions. And so, yeah, you need to have it helps to have an understanding and a respect for all the elements that go into it, so that you can bring the best of you to the project.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you worked on a tour, because a lot of what we do at the Carpenter Center is working with tours. So you've worked on both sides of that now, and can have that understanding when working with a production manager on a tour, what that's like.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a bit about the difference between what like a technical director does and a production manager? How are those different or similar? I think a lot of people might think they're kind of the same, but they're a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I would say as we've mentioned, a production manager needs to be able to see the entire picture and understand each aspect of the picture and the players involved to help facilitate smooth transitions into creating whatever the outcome is. Whereas a technical director usually is more focused on one aspect. It's usually the scenery or whatever that sort of technical element is on stage, and then you have a lighting designer and you have a costume designer. So, in a smaller theater, oftentimes a technical director could act as more of a production manager. But in a larger space, they're usually separate, and a production manager has a greater oversight into the entire picture of what's going on.
Right. You're kind of like the conductor for all those different elements, like conducting the whole thing as it goes.
Right. Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
Cool. Can you walk us through what it takes from a production manager standpoint, from your standpoint, to bring a performance to life on stage at the Carpenter Center? From the moment we book the show to that truck leaves the loading dock, what are some of the milestones? What does your day-to-day look like to make all that happen?
Ooh. Well, how much time do you have, Olivia? Because this could take a while. Well, it actually begins before they get there, because usually what happens is when we're planning a season, which is usually at least a year or more ahead of time, I will often be given technical writers for whatever it is that we're looking to potentially bring in. And the reason that I'm given those is to look them over to see if there are any big red flags. Is this something that we can actually do? Will it fit in our space? How much time is it going to take? Because oftentimes there's a lot of prep work that goes in before the artist gets here. And so that needs to be known in order to fit into a calendar season. How much is it going to cost? Budgetary constraints are often a reason not to do a show, depending upon what your overall budget is for the year. So those preparations start a year or more in advance. But then once it's booked, I will get usually an updated writer, because usually what you look at first is not actually what happens. And then I'll reach out to, whether it be an agent, whether sometimes it's the artist directly, depending if it's a single show, or the production manager, the technical director. Every show is a little different structure as to what their personnel is. So I will have the writer and the contract, because oftentimes in the contract there's additional information that's not in the writer that needs to be considered, and reach out to them and sort of hash out what's actually needed and not needed, and discuss everything from schedule to hospitality to dressing room needs to, they often have questions about hotel and transportation, which aren't always my area, but I can at least guide them in that direction. And then from there, once everything is sort of settled, you sometimes you need to get extra equipment, rental gear, any of that they've requested that we don't have, because obviously as a theater you can't have every need met in your own stock and inventory. And then it's also disseminating information to our own staff. Sometimes I don't think people realize that every department is affected by this information. The ticket office needs to know run times, and if there's an intermission, and is it appropriate for children, because they get those questions from patrons. The front of house needs to know similar information so they know when the intermission happens, and will the artist be signing autographs? Is there merchandise being sold? Marketing and the graphic design needs program information or promotional material. And then our production department needs to know, what equipment, what our schedule is, what our labor needs are. And then also the facilities of the university needs to know, so they can schedule air conditioning or heat, the custodians to make sure that the theater and the lobby and the bathrooms are all clean for the performance, and the patrons, and to clean afterwards. So it's a lot of dissemination of information. And then once the day comes, then you're there with the artists and do your best to follow the schedule that everyone's agreed upon, so everyone gets a meal and gets a break, and they're not worn out by the end of the day, and hopefully all of your preparations have afforded you the opportunity to make a smooth day. So, because you really want your artists to be happy and comfortable and relaxed when they come in so that they can really just focus on what their performance is and be able to give the best of themselves to the patrons that come for that, memorable performance. Sort of like with your Beauty and the Beast, you never know who's going to be there, and is it going to change their life? Is it something that's they're having a bad day and it's changed their whole world? So you really try to do that, and then you sort of go back in reverse order at the end of the day and pack it all up and try and get people out and safely. And then there's always follow up at the end with invoices and billing and reports that need to go to agents and artists and things like that. So it's a comprehensive day, and it's a lot goes into it.
I think, sometimes people don't realize, a lot of our shows are one night only, sometimes two night, but it's like that one night takes a year or more of planning to get that performance to be successful and enjoyable for everybody, to happen on stage. And that's
Absolutely
a lot of work for a one night only event.
And you've got to be ready for the curveballs, the shipment that doesn't arrive, or the air conditioning that's not on, or the food that hasn't come, or the wrong food has come. You've got to be able to think on your feet and go with the flow. And it really helps to have the right team around you to support you, and who could step in if you need that.
Yeah. What has you talked about, working to see, like, could we even do this performance? I remember, for example, when we did, I think it was Trinity Irish Dance, you mentioned something like their specs were for a certain stage width, and you had to like make a decision how we were going to adjust that. I don't know all the technical details, but yeah. I do remember you mentioned that. And that's just one example. What has been like the most technically challenging show that we've done in your time? Well, since the beginning, really, that you can remember. And it's like, how are we going to make this happen? Yeah.
I mean, I would say we've been pretty fortunate. I mean, there have been challenges, and a lot of the challenges oftentimes have to do with companies coming from other countries. Mm-hmm. Because there are language barriers, there are vocabulary differences, there are different expectations. A lot of different European countries get a lot more support from their government, so they, have an unlimited budget, and trying to negotiate. Well, it's not quite the same here, so we're going to have to, find a way around it. So those are some of the biggest challenges we have, but the one show that I remember that was the most challenging was we did a show, and I believe it was from Israel, called the Aluminum Show. It was a number of years ago, and it was one of those shows that wasn't scheduled in the best time with everything else that was going on. So we didn't actually have the amount of time that we should have had before and after. We were pretty much going into another show exactly the day after. And so it turned into a 23-hour day. And it was one of those shows where all the soft goods came down and had to be hung, perpendicularly or on an angle in a way that they're, not typically used. And it was a large show, and it needed a large crew. And it was difficult to find all the crew we need, and the time frame. It was just it was a 23 straight hour day without a break, and that was probably the most challenging one that I.
Now, what is a soft good?
Soft goods are all like the black legs that you see hanging on the stage, or they're also across the top of the stage. It's called a border, and that blocks so you don't see the lighting units that are being hung. And so basically we had to take them all down so you could see the entire stage. But then typically they're hung on pipes that go across the stage, and they're pipes all already permanently installed. Well, they wanted them to go upstage, downstage, so perpendicular to where they usually go, and there are no pipes there. And then they wanted them on angles, and they wanted them to hang at different heights from one side to the other. And and then they had these huge aluminum tubes that had to go through them, and yeah, it was it was not one of my most favorite ones to do. But
oh wow.
yeah, and then on top of that, you have a language barrier because they're coming from, like I said, I think they were coming from Israel. So not that they didn't speak English, but once again, you throw into vocabulary differences and expectation differences. And the entire crew that showed up, none of them were the people that I had advanced the show with. So then you have another level of, they didn't get the information that was already agreed upon. So they're coming in with different expectations than you had, that we had anticipated. So it had a lot of challenges.
That is a long day.
Yeah, it was a long day.
Have you had a most rewarding show that, you're just like, wow, I can't believe this is happening on the stage, and I helped make this happen here?
Yeah, personally for me, it was when the Dalai Lama was there. Mm-hmm. He came, he was being given an award from Amnesty International. And then he was also going on to give a talk down at it was the Terrace Theater or the Arena somewhere downtown Long Beach. And so we worked for a long time with Secret Service and all these different elements to have it. And he's someone that I've just loved for a long time. And so it was very exciting for me. And literally the day before, he got sick. And we weren't sure that he was actually going to show up. And he did end up showing up. And, I was able to work with him, get a blessing from him and a few words with him. And so that, I would say, was the most rewarding, especially because the next day he didn't actually do his talk in downtown Long Beach. The conference went on without him because he was still sick. So I felt very fortunate that he was in our space.
Oh, that is so special. I knew he came, but I didn't know the story about him being sick. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty magical.
And that is something, like, I never thought I would be working with this person and having to coordinate with Secret Service. I mean, it just shows like all the different elements that the job can bring. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. I want to recognize the team of people you work with because, like you mentioned, it is a huge team. How many people does it take to bring one of our like large scale performances to life? Like Cirque Mechanics is one I can think of, or I know we haven't brought them in quite a few years, but Peking Acrobats. From my perspective, that's a large scale show, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a dance performance is more intensive. So, how many people, how many crew members do we have to bring in to make that show a reality?
You'd be surprised that it doesn't take as many as you would think. Okay. Once again, it depends upon the show, of course, but one of the things about touring is if a company is doing it correctly, they have a process where it's really easy to go in and out. And oftentimes they bring their own crew with them. So they only need sort of support crew with us. Like, for example, Peking Acrobats, we've had them several times. And all of their acrobats set up all of their own stuff. So all their poles and all their trampolines and all of their rigging, they do that all themselves. So we don't have to do that. So then we just have our support staff to focus lights and set up whatever sound needs they have. And we have, I can't speak enough about the crew that we have. We've really been blessed to have people who, I said I've been here 25 years. There are some crew that have been here almost as long as I have. And they're not full-time employees. All of our crew are on-call, intermittent employees that are, work from show to show, but they're really dedicated to our space and what we do. And they're there every day giving all they have to make sure that the product we put out is the best product it can be, so that the patrons have that experience. Jeff Warner has been there almost from the beginning. He is our lighting designer and our master electrician. Mike Blumenfeld, who's always there. He's our flyman and he's our main person on deck, has been there with me all these years. Jim McCurdy is our main sound engineer. All these guys, like I said, they're not full-time employees, but they are just as dedicated to what we do as anybody who would be a full-time employee. And we couldn't do it without them. And then we have, a huge group of other people that sort of come and go. Sometimes they start with us and move on to bigger things, which is always nice. You like to make sure that you're giving them a good foundation. So that's what I really appreciate about it, because I always know that whomever we're going to have there is going to be there in the trenches, whether it's easy or hard, to make sure that what we produce is the best it can be.
Yeah, and I think our patrons can attest that, if they come to the Carpenter Center, they know they're getting a good quality production, and that it's going to be a smooth and enjoyable experience. And that definitely shows. All that work, to make that happens, like you said, for the months leading up to the performance, and all the work that the crew has put in, and the days and weeks leading up to.
And they don't find out the information of what they're doing until they get there that day.
Oh my goodness.
So unlike myself, who has been working on this sometimes for months or years and talking to people and working out all the details, they show up at their call time that day, and you give them a briefing, and they just have to get on board and make it happen. So it's pretty amazing what they do.
Yeah, so that takes
fortunate
technical acumen to know, like, all right, I know exactly, I'm going to get my briefing and then I get to work.
Wow. Yep, exactly.
That's fantastic. What is one thing you wish people knew about, working backstage or the production management side? There's like one thing you could say, like, I wish people knew this. What would that be, if anything?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. I would say that I would like people to realize that, obviously the performers who come have honed their craft for years. They have studied, they have rehearsed, they have practiced, but so have the people backstage. And, oftentimes, sort of like myself, I started very young. I was doing summer stock from the age of 12 and working through high school at professional theaters. I went to school for this. I've been fortunate not to have to work in a field other than my own. And, people go to school, they study, they work hard to have just as a proficiency of their job as the performers who are on stage. And sometimes I don't think everybody quite realizes that, yes, you can go to school for this, and people do study and work hard throughout their entire life to be good at what their job is. Not everybody can do it.
Yeah, it is a craft in its own right. To have that experience and practice and know how exactly how all the pieces move together. Absolutely. That's a great one. Yeah. How do you think the performing arts is evolving technically in the 21st century? This is a bit of a pivot, but I think it kind of ties into that. How have things changed since 25 years ago? One thing I can think of is, I think you mentioned, we get a lot more requests for projectors now. So more of that high quality, like, projections are becoming very popular. But are there other things that you've noticed? And are you seeing things for the future that you think the performing arts are headed a certain way?
Well, I think the biggest change is options. With the evolution of technology, it's afforded almost unlimited possibilities. As you mentioned, projections. I said that, projections can allow a blank wall to become anything you want it to be. And it can replace, bulky scenery. It can be used in small spaces where you don't have a big budget, so you can create an atmosphere with projection. It can work in large spaces and alongside scenery. So, that's one thing. Sound has evolved from 25 years ago, where, performers all can have a wireless microphone now, and it gives a director more freedom for staging or a choreographer for choreography. And it just really gives, I think the biggest thing is it gives our imaginations options, because anything is possible, with all of the changes that have come and the changes that will come. I'm sure we'll look back 25 years and be like, projection, who need that? Now we've got holograms or whatever it is. But the fact that it gives us options, I mean, what more could you ask for in any type of art, is to have the freedom and the unlimited ability of your imagination.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think that's important too, because I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, with like movies and the internet, like, why would I go to performing arts? And I'm like, that's not true, because like as technology evolves, so will the performing arts, and they're just going to make shows, with the time. It's going to continue to evolve like anything evolves. Right. But I don't think anything's ever going to replace that energy that comes from being in a space and seeing a performance on a stage, whatever, even 100, 500 years in the future.
There is no difference. I mean, there is nothing that can compare.
Yeah. So we're about out of time, but there were a few just kind of fun questions I've been ending all of these with, just to get to know you better. And so I call them the rapid fire. So
Lord.
We'll get going with those. Do you have a favorite play?
Oh, Lord. This is one of those questions, like when people say, do you have a favorite place you've traveled? And I really don't. For me, it's more about the experience. So sometimes I go to see something because of the actor. I may hate the play, but I go because I want to see the actor, or it's a designer who I want to see. And it's about the sort of like your Beauty and the Beast moment. Like I remember seeing James Earl Jones on Broadway doing Fences. Ralph Fiennes in Hamlet was astounding. One of my favorites is Patrick Stewart's one-man show, Christmas Carol. I think that's the one show I've seen multiple times. Jim Dale and Barnum, Mandy Patinkin and Evita, or Sunday in the Park with George. It's about the memory, more so than the content for me.
Does that go for musicals as well?
Yeah, like I said, I remember as a kid going to see Barnum with Jim Dale, and to this day, I love that musical. And I was actually, when I was in high school, I worked in a dinner theater and was able to work on a production of that. I've seen Mandy Patinkin and everything he's done. He was brilliant in Evita, and like I said, then on the flip side, you've got Sunday in the Park with George, which is a very different role. I remember seeing a very early production in a very small theater in New York called the Scottsboro Boys. And that was astounding. So yeah, I mean, they just all have something about it that you love, or I love.
Yeah. And I think that's what's special about some performances is you may not know that who this person is going to become yet, and then a few years down the road you're like, wow, I saw them in their early days, or I saw them when they did this, and that was such a memorable experience, like you said. Charity
Barnum, who played against Jim Dale, was Glenn Close.
Oh wow.
I think it was like one of her first Broadway musical that she had done. So then she goes on to Sunset Boulevard and everything else she's done. So you just don't know.
Favorite, well, I feel like this would be the Dalai Lama, but I could be wrong. Favorite performer to ever come to the Carpenter Center? Maybe somebody other than the Dalai Lama?
That's sort of similar to your favorite play, your favorite musical. The thing that I find such a blessing for me, having been at the Carpenter Center now for almost 25 years, is that you meet a lot of people. And we've had a lot of artists that are repeat artists that come back, and they become family, and you become family, and you become friends. So some of those for me would be, Davis Gaines. He's been there several times. Capitol Steps, who unfortunately, won't be back this year, but the friendships, and it just becomes like family. The Trox, Ballet Trocadero, they come a lot, and love working with them. And a newcomer, Mandy Harvey. Mandy Harvey's sort of a new family member of ours. So that's what is really special about it, is the connections you make. And it's like old home week when they're back, and you just fall into a rhythm, and it's just lovely and wonderful, and it's going to be a good day.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think it speaks so much to the work you and all your crew do when people want to come back to the Carpenter Center year after year, because they talk about how it's just such a great experience, and they love working with you and working with our theater and everyone. So yeah, absolutely. I love thinking of it.
That's our goal. That's what we aim for,
It is kind of like an extended family all across the world.
It is.
What are you listening to these days? Do you have an album you recommend that people pick up?
Not really. I've been, I listen to a lot of classical music. That's sort of my go-to, but I've been revisiting, I've got a lot of records here at home. And so I've been revisiting a lot of sort of old school musical singers like Alfred Drake and Gordon McRae and Ezio Pinza and Richard Kiley, like back in the, the 50s, when they were just rich and meaty. And so I've been listening to a lot of sort of old school musicals.
I like that. Yeah. I didn't put this on the list of questions, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Yeah. You are a world traveler. 2 or 3 top highlights from your travels around the world.
Oh, Lord. That goes back with the favorite play, Olivia.
I know.
Oh, gosh. That's hard, too. I had I did 5 weeks in Egypt and Jordan, and I camped through the Western Desert with Bedouins and flew in a hot air balloon over the Valley of the Kings and Queens at sunrise. That was pretty amazing. Climbing the Great Wall of China was fantastic. I stayed with a Vietnamese family in a small village in northern Vietnam, which was interesting, seeing as we didn't speak the same language, but we, had a fantastic time. Being in the Amazon was pretty amazing, and climbing Machu Picchu. So yeah, I mean, I was in Australia and New Zealand. Everything is just, every place has something magical about it.
I love that. I think that was, when I first met you and somebody mentioned me like, oh, Kathryn travels a lot. I'm like, oh, okay. And then as I got to know you better, I was like, no, Kathryn has traveled. Most people don't travel. And I love hearing about your stories. And I'm like, I want to do that. Adding it to the bucket list.
Yes. Another benefit of the Carpenter Center, because sometimes, I'll have a bit of downtime. So.
Right. That's fantastic.
And yeah, I worked at the Salt Lake Olympics in 2002, and that was
cool.
Pretty amazing as well. Wow. So another benefit of the understanding of the Carpenter Center.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to as COVID restrictions start to lift and we start to see the light at the end of the tunnel? What are you most excited about? What are you looking forward to?
Well, I definitely miss my crew. I miss all my people. Like I said, they're all extraordinary and such an important part of what we do at the Carpenter Center. So I do miss them. Outside of that, I think I'm looking forward to the same thing every other theater goer is looking forward to. It's that experience of live art again. As we mentioned before, you can of course appreciate the talents of artists that you watch on live stream or on a movie or on your computer, but it just doesn't replace the live experience. Seeing something, whether it's a performance or a concert or an art exhibit or an installation, there's an energy, there's an excitement, there's an atmosphere, and to me that's such an integral element to any experience. And I think that's kind of what I miss the most, because I'm not much of a stream kind of stuff. It's like when you go to the Metropolitan Opera and you're sitting in the house waiting for the show to start, whether it be an opera or the ballet that's there, and they have these chandeliers, there's several of them, and they look like exploding stars in a way, and they just start to rise. And it's a huge theater, so you know as those chandeliers go by you that it's about to start, and it's that excitement that builds, and that's kind of what I kind of miss the most, I would say.
The chandeliers rising.
Yes, we don't have one at the Carpenter Center, but you can imagine it, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. I think people listening to this will agree. Live performance is one they are, many of us are looking forward to experiencing again. I've attended a few virtual performances, and it's just not the same.
It's not.
I'm very eager as well to get back in a space and see people on stage again, and see people backstage again as well. Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and I hope, I know that anybody listening is gonna learn something new about production, about what happens backstage at a performance, and hopefully a little bit about the Carpenter Center and the people that work there as well. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
You are welcome.
Beyond the Stage is produced by the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. Views expressed by guests of the show or the host are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the university. A special thanks to today's guests and to the entire staff of the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, including our Executive Director, Megan Klein-Crockett. Audio engineering is provided by Ken Beaupre, graphic design by Patty Laurel, digital communications by Franz Newman, and additional marketing and media assistance by Amber Legaspi Valdez. Our theme music is by Ken Beaupre. If you'd like to support Beyond the Stage or the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, please visit us online at carpenterarts.org. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.